fire burns low tonight, its light flickering softly against the walls, and beyond the window, the night lies quiet and still. Close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let yourself drift backward. Far beyond the reach of memory, past centuries of kingdoms rising and falling, past the echo of swords and sermons, until you find yourself standing at the dawn of a new world. But first, I want you to know how glad I am that you are here. If you have just found me, and if you enjoy this video, perhaps, then you also would consider to subscribe. It would really mean the world to me. And please tell me something about yourself in the comment section. For instance, where you come from. What country do you live in? I genuinely want to know. I myself, I live in Sweden, and I have lived here all my life. Well, let's get going with the video now. So get yourself comfortable. Sink down in your sofa or bed. Get a warm blanket and a soft pillow. Dim the lights. Close your eyes. You settle into stillness now, letting the weight of the day fall away like snow from a pine branch. The air around you grows softer, quieter, and every breath feels slower than the last. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Inhale deeply, as though you were standing at the edge of a northern fjord, the kind that cuts through mountains like a blade of blue glass. The air there is cold and clean, tasting faintly of pine resin, salt water, and wood smoke drifting from a distant hearth. Somewhere, a gull calls once and then is gone. The only sound that remains is the slow rhythm of your breathing and the whisper of unseen waves folding against the shore. The world begins to fade. The lights, the noise, the clock ticking in the background, and something older takes its place. You're standing now in the half-light of the past, where history doesn't shout or rush, but moves gently, like a tide drawing you backward through time. Tonight, you will follow one man's life, a story written in frost, fire, and salt. His name is Harald Sigurdsson, known to history as Harald Hardrada, the Hard Ruler. To some, he was the last great Viking king, the final echo of an age when courage and conquest shaped the map of the world. His story will carry you across seas and kingdoms, from the frozen fjords of Norway to the shining domes of Constantinople, from the deserts of the Holy Land to the green fields of England, where his saga finds its quiet end. But there is no hurry. Time moves differently here, slower, gentler, like clouds drifting across a pale winter sky. You have nowhere to be but here, listening, breathing, letting the past unfold in its own rhythm. The year is 1015, and somewhere among Norway's steep valleys and wind-carved mountains, a child is born into a world ruled by iron and faith, by oaths and ambition. His father, Sigurd Sture, is a minor king of the uplands, a patient, steady man who tends his lands and his herds as carefully as he tends his people. His mother, Sta Gudbrandsdatter, is a woman of sharp mind and royal blood, descended from kings and unafraid of destiny. She has seen the wheel of power turn before. From her first marriage came a son named Olaf, who will grow to become Olaf Haraldsson, the future Saint Olaf, and the beacon of Norway's Christian crown. And so, from the beginning, Harald's world is one of lineage and legend, of brothers destined for greatness, and of a cold northern land still learning how to live between old gods and new faith. This means that young Harald, though born to modest nobility, carries in his blood the quiet pulse of destiny, a thread connecting him to the great lineages of the north. His half-brother, Olaf, already walks a larger path, riding across distant seas, earning silver and renown in the courts of foreign kings. The songs that reach the uplands tell of his daring, of longships cutting through gray water, of men shouting his name as they storm the beaches of far-off lands. For Harald, these are more than stories. They are glimpses of a world that waits beyond the mountains, calling to him even as snow settles on the rooftops of home. You can almost see him there, a boy with bright eyes and restless spirit, sitting close to the hearth as sparks drift upward into the smoke-dark beams. He listens when the older men speak, his small hands tracing invisible runes in the dirt as warriors tell of gods and heroes, of Odin's ravens, Thor's hammer, and the brave who crossed seas to carve their names into the sagas. Outside, the wind hums low through the gaps in the timber walls, a sound like the sea far away. The fire crackles, the shadows move, and somewhere in that flickering light, history begins to stir. Time passes, not in minutes or hours, but in the turning of seasons. The boy grows taller, his voice steadier, his thoughts heavier with questions. The world beyond the valley is changing. Olaf, the half-brother he has only heard about in stories, returns to Norway, the same year Harald is born, or perhaps just before. He comes not as a wandering raider now, but as a man of ambition and purpose, hardened by exile and war. He brings with him wealth, warriors, and a vision to unite the fractured petty kingdoms beneath one crown, his crown, and to carry the Christian faith into a land still bound to the old gods. His rise is swift. By 1016, the rival kings are defeated, the banners of the old jarls lowered. Norway, for the first time in generations, has a single ruler. For a while, the land breathes in uneasy peace. But that peace is forged in the fires of faith and force, and beneath its surface, resentment smolders. Many of the old families, those who once ruled by their own right and worshipped their own gods, chafe under Olaf's rule. They whisper in halls lit by smoky torches. They remember the freedom of their ancestors, the days when kings were chosen, not imposed. And soon, those whispers grow into promises and oaths, into plans carried by the cold wind. Harald grows up in this shifting world, a Norway caught between old and new, between the sagas and the scriptures. He is sent to live at Olaf's court, a place alive with the clash of armor, the scent of iron and tallow, the murmur of priests beside skalds. There he learns the discipline of war and the language of power. He watches the way men look at his brother, some with loyalty, others with quiet hatred. He studies the weight of a sword, the map of his homeland, the faces of those who would one day rise against them. He is still a boy, perhaps 10, perhaps 12, too young to fight, yet old enough to feel the tension in the air, to understand that every kingdom rests on the edge of a blade. Across the sea, in Denmark, there is another king, a man named Sinutt the Great, who rules not only Denmark, but also England and parts of Norway's southern coast. Sinutt is one of the most powerful men in the Christian world, and he has ambitions for Norway. He supports the Norwegian nobles who oppose Olaf, providing them with ships and silver and soldiers. The pressure mounts. Olaf's kingdom begins to crack. By 1028, Sinutt himself sails to Norway with a great fleet, and Olaf, realizing he cannot stand against such overwhelming force, flees into exile. He goes east to Sweden, and then further still, to the lands of the Rus, seeking refuge and plotting his return. Young Harald, now 13 or 14 years old, goes with him. You can imagine the journey, the cold wind on the water, the uncertainty of exile. They are no longer kings, but fugitives, traveling through a world that is vast and often hostile. But they are not defeated. Not yet. Olaf gathers his strength. He wins the support of the Swedish king and other allies. And in the summer of 1030, he decides it is time to return, to reclaim his throne, to fight for Norway one last time. The army that marches with Olaf is not large, but it is determined. They cross the mountains from Sweden into Norway, moving through the high passes, the air thin and cold, the sun pale against the gray sky. Harald is with them, no longer a boy, but a young man of 15, still untested in battle, but eager to prove himself. He carries a sword, perhaps a shield. His heart beats with the rhythm of the march. He does not yet know what awaits them. The Norwegian forces loyal to Sinutt gather to meet them. The two armies converge near a place called Stiklestad, in the Trondelag region, on the 29th of July, 1030. The battle that follows is swift and brutal. Olaf's men are outnumbered. The fighting is fierce, chaotic. The clash of iron on iron, the cries of men, the smell of blood and earth. Harald fights in this battle. His first true taste of war, and somewhere in the chaos, he is wounded. Struck down, perhaps by a blade or a spear. He falls, bleeding, the world spinning around him. But he does not die. As the battle turns against Olaf, as the king himself is cut down and killed, some of Olaf's surviving men manage to pull Harald from the field. They hide him, tend to his wounds, keep him safe through the long, terrible hours after the battle. Olaf is dead. The cause is lost. Norway belongs now to Knut's son, Svein, and to the Jarls who supported him. But Harald lives. You breathe slowly now, feeling the weight of that moment. The silence after the battle, the pain and the fear, and the stubborn refusal to give in. Harald is alive, but he is also an exile, a fugitive, a young man with a claim to nothing, wanted by those who rule Norway. He cannot stay. He must go. And so, in the autumn of 1030, Harald begins a journey that will take him further from home than almost any Norse warrior of his age. He flees east, crossing into Sweden, and then continuing onward through forests and rivers, across the vast distances of the northern world, until he reaches the lands of the Rus, the principalities that stretch from the Baltic to the Black Sea, where Norse and Slavic cultures have mingled, and where the rivers are highways to unimaginable wealth and danger. He comes eventually to Novgorod, a great city on the Volkhov River, where the ruling prince is Yaroslav the Wise, a man of learning and power, a prince who welcomes warriors of skill and courage. Harald offers his service. He is young, but he has proven himself in battle. He has royal blood. Yaroslav accepts him, and for a time, Harald lives in the courts of Kiev and Rus, learning the ways of a different world, fighting in Yaroslav's campaigns, earning respect and silver. But Harald is restless. He's always been restless. The north is too familiar, too small. He hears stories of a city far to the south, a city of gold and marble and power beyond imagining, a city called Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, the greatest Christian empire in the world. And he hears of the Varangian Guard, an elite unit of Norse and Rus warriors who serve the Byzantine emperor himself, men who earn fortunes and win glory in the distant wars of the Mediterranean. Harald decides he will go there. The journey south is long, following the great rivers, the Dnieper and the Volga, through lands where caravans trade in silk and spices, where the cultures of the north and east and south all meet. You can almost feel the rhythm of the oars, the pull of the current, the heat growing as the boats move toward warmer climates. Weeks pass, perhaps months. The world changes around him. The forests thin. The architecture shifts. The languages multiply. And finally, after a journey of hundreds and hundreds of miles, Harald arrives at Constantinople, the city the Norse call Miklagard, the great city. It is unlike anything he has ever seen. The walls rise impossibly high, encircling a city of domes and towers and vast marketplaces. The streets are paved with stone. The Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral, gleams with mosaics of gold and blue. The harbors are crowded with ships from every corner of the known world. The air smells of salt and spice and incense. It is a place of wealth and learning and intrigue, a place where emperors rule from thrones of purple and armies march under the double-headed eagle. Harald presents himself to the commanders of the Varangian Guard. He is accepted. He takes an oath of loyalty to the Byzantine emperor, and he becomes, for the next decade or more, a soldier of the empire, a warrior in the service of Rome's eastern successor. The years that follow are years of war and travel and accumulation of wealth. Harald fights in the empire's campaigns across the Mediterranean. He sails to Sicily, where the Byzantines are locked in conflict with Arab forces for control of the island. He fights in the deserts and mountains, learning the art of siege warfare, of tactics far more sophisticated than the shield walls and charges of the north. He marches through lands that are baked by the sun, where the heat shimmers off the stones and the call to prayer echoes from minarets. He travels, some sources suggest, as far as the Holy Land, to Jerusalem itself, a city sacred to Christians, a place of pilgrimage and ancient memory. Whether this is historical fact or later embellishment is uncertain, but the sources from his time speak of it, and so we include it here, cautiously, as part of the legend that surrounds him. You imagine him there, a Norse warrior standing in the narrow streets of Jerusalem, far from the fjords, far from home, a man caught between worlds. Through all of this, Harald grows in skill and reputation. He is not just a warrior, but a leader, a strategist. He commands men in battle. He wins victories. He earns a fortune in gold and silver and jewels, more wealth than most kings in the north could dream of. The Byzantine emperors reward their soldiers well, and Harald is one of the best. He is called by various names in the sources, sometimes Araltes, a Greek rendering of Harald, and his exploits become the subject of stories told back in the north. But life in Constantinople is also complex, dangerous, in ways that have nothing to do with battle. The Byzantine court is a place of intrigue, of shifting alliances, of emperors who rise and fall through plots and poison, as much as through war. Harald navigates this world, but not always successfully. There are suggestions in the sources that he fell out of favor at some point, perhaps accused of withholding plunder, perhaps entangled in political conflicts he did not fully understand. The details are murky, lost to time, but what is clear is that by the early 1040s, Harald decides it is time to leave. He does not leave quietly. According to the sagas, he departs in a dramatic fashion, possibly escaping from imprisonment, taking his accumulated wealth with him. The exact circumstances are debated by historians, but what matters is this. Harald leaves Constantinople a rich man, a famous man, a warrior tested in the wars of the south, ready at last to return to the north and claim the power he believes is his birthright. He goes first back to Kiev and Rus, to the court of Prince Yaroslav. He has been gone for more than a decade, and much has changed. He is no longer a young exile, but a seasoned commander, a man of wealth and reputation. Yaroslav welcomes him, and Harald, cementing his ties to the Rus, marries Yaroslav's daughter, Elisif, known in Norse sources as Elisif. It is a strategic marriage, a bond between two powerful families, but perhaps also something more. You imagine the wedding, the feasting, the blending of Norse and Slavic traditions, the sense of a man finally beginning to put down roots after years of wandering. But Harald's eyes are still turned westward, toward Norway. In Norway, things have shifted since the Battle of Stiklestad. Canute the Great is dead. His sons struggle to hold his empire together. The old Norwegian nobility, who once opposed Olaf, have grown dissatisfied with their situation. And in Denmark, Sinut's nephew, Magnus, the son of Olaf Haraldsson, has risen to power. Yes, Magnus, Harald's own nephew, the son of his half-brother, has become king of Norway. It is one of those strange turns of history, the kind that makes dynasties and breaks them. Magnus is called Magnus the Good, a capable king, but his hold on power is not absolute. He faces threats from Denmark, from rival claimants, from the constant instability of the age. When Harald returns from the east, bringing with him his wealth and his warriors and his reputation, Magnus sees both a threat and an opportunity. They are family, after all, and Harald's military experience could be invaluable. They negotiate. They come to an agreement. Harald will share the rule of Norway with Magnus. They will be co-kings, dividing the realm between them, supporting each other against external enemies. For a brief time, this arrangement holds. Harald returns to Norway in 1045, or 1046, and for the first time, since he fled as a wounded teenager, he is home. He walks the shores of the fjords again, breathes the cold northern air, sees the mountains rising in the distance. He is no longer a fugitive, but a king, or at least half a king, a man with power and purpose. But history does not pause for long. In the year 1047, Magnus the Good dies suddenly. Some sources say he died from an illness, perhaps on campaign. The exact cause is uncertain. What matters is that he is gone, and with his death, Harald becomes the sole king of Norway. The power he has sought, the throne that was lost when his half-brother fell at Stiklestad, is now his. He is approximately 32 years old, in the prime of his strength and ambition, and he intends to make his mark. You breathe slowly, feeling the passage of time, the way history shifts and settles, like a ship finding its course. Breathe in, breathe out, let yourself sink deeper into comfort. Harald is king, but being king is not the same as being secure. Norway is a realm of chieftains and landowners, men who remember the old ways, who guard their independence fiercely. Harald must consolidate his power. He must bind the realm together, by persuasion or by force. He does this with a firm hand, brooking no dissent, rewarding loyalty, and punishing rebellion. He earns his nickname, Hardrada, the hard ruler, through his uncompromising approach to governance. But his ambitions do not stop at Norway's borders. Across the narrow sea, in Denmark, there is a king named Svein Estridsson, a man who once fought alongside Magnus, who once considered himself an ally of the Norwegian crown. But Svein has his own ambitions. He wants to secure Denmark's independence, to resist Norwegian dominance, and when Harald claims suzerainty over Denmark, as Magnus had before him, Svein refuses to submit. The conflict that follows lasts for years, a grinding, exhausting series of raids and battles, and naval engagements that drain both kingdoms without producing a clear victor. Harald leads his fleet south, raiding the Danish coasts, burning settlements, trying to break Svein's will. Svein responds in kind, harrying the Norwegian shores, refusing to yield. It is a war of attrition, fought across cold waters and wind-swept islands. A war that both men know cannot continue forever, but neither is willing to end without victory. One of the most significant engagements occurs in the year 1062, at the mouth of the Nisan River, on the western coast of what is now Sweden, then part of the contested borderlands between Norway and Denmark. The sources describe a naval battle. Fleets of longships clashing on the water, the crack of oars snapping, the shouts of men, the chaos of combat at sea. Harald's forces and Svein's forces meet in a fierce struggle, and though the outcome is not entirely clear from the sources, it seems to have been a hard-fought draw, neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Both kings withdraw. The war continues, but the intensity begins to fade. Both men are aging. Both kingdoms are weary. By 1064, a peace is finally negotiated. It is not a peace of victory, but of exhaustion. Harald and Svein agree to recognize each other's realms, to end the raiding, to accept that neither will dominate the other. It is a pragmatic peace, the kind that acknowledges reality rather than settling old scores. And with this peace, Harald's attention begins to turn elsewhere. He looks west, across the North Sea, toward England. England, in the early 1060s, is a realm on the edge of change. The king is Edward the Confessor, an aging monarch with no direct heirs, a pious man more interested in building churches than in the hard business of governance. The great earls of England, men like Godwin of Wessex and his sons, wield enormous power, and the question of who will succeed Edward is one that occupies every ambitious man with even a sliver of a claim. Harald Hardrada has such a claim, or at least he believes he does. It is based on an agreement, real or imagined, between Magnus the Good and Harthacnut, a former king of England and Denmark, an agreement that the survivor of the two would inherit the other's realm. Magnus never pressed the claim. Harald, his successor, sees no reason not to. But Harald is not the only one with eyes on the English throne. There is Harold Godwinson, the powerful Earl of Wessex, a man who commands the loyalty of much of southern England, a man who expects to be named Edward's successor. There is William, Duke of Normandy, across the Channel, who also claims that Edward promised him the throne. And there are others, lesser claimants, men who see opportunity in the coming uncertainty. The stage is being set for a struggle that will reshape the history of England and the North. Edward the Confessor dies in January of 1066. Almost immediately, Harold Godwinson is crowned king by the Witan, the assembly of English nobles. It is a move that shocks and angers the other claimants. Harald Hardrada, hearing the news, begins to prepare. He knows that if he is to press his claim, he must act swiftly before Harold Godwinson can consolidate his power. He begins gathering his forces, calling in his ships, assembling an invasion fleet. He finds an unexpected ally in Tostig Godwinson, Harold's own brother. Tostig, once the Earl of Northumbria, has been exiled from England after a rebellion against his harsh rule. He is bitter, resentful, eager for revenge against the brother who did not support him. He comes to Harold, offering his service, his knowledge of England, his claim to legitimacy in the north. Harold accepts. Together, they plan the invasion. In the late summer of 1066, Harold's fleet sets sail. The sources vary on the size of the fleet, some suggesting as many as 300 ships, though modern historians suspect the number may be somewhat smaller. Regardless, it is a formidable force, one of the largest invasion fleets the North has seen in years. The ships are filled with warriors, men from Norway, men from the Orkneys and other Norse settlements, men seeking glory in land and the chance to serve a legendary king. The fleet crosses the North Sea, a journey of several days, the ships riding the swells, the wind filling the sails. You can imagine the sight of it. The long line of dragon-prowed vessels moving across the gray water, the oars rising and falling in rhythm, the men checking their weapons, telling stories, thinking of what lies ahead. Harold stands at the prow of his flagship, his hair now more gray than gold, his body marked by decades of war, but his will as hard as ever. This is his moment. This is the gamble he has been building toward his entire life. The fleet makes landfall on the northern coast of England, in the region of Northumbria. They sail up the River Ouse, toward the city of York, one of the great centers of power in the north. Harold Godwinson, far to the south, hears of the invasion and begins marching his army north, but he is still days away. In the meantime, the northern earls, Morcar of Northumbria and Edwin of Mercia, gather their forces to oppose Harold. The two armies meet on September 20th, 1066, at a place called Fulford, just south of York. The battle that follows is a significant engagement, thousands of men clashing in the mud and reeds near the river. The details are sparse, but the outcome is clear. Harold's forces win a decisive victory. The English earls are defeated, their armies scattered, and York, lacking the strength to resist, surrenders to Harold. It is a triumph. And for a moment, it must seem to Harold that his gamble is paying off. The north of England is his. All he needs to do now is hold it until Harold Godwinson arrives, and then defeat the southern king in battle. But history has a way of surprising even the most experienced warriors. Harold's army, confident after their victory, sets up camp at a place called Stamford Bridge, a crossing point on the River Derwent, about 7 miles east of York. It is a good position, defensible, with access to water and supplies. The weather is warm, unusually warm for late September in northern England. Some of the men take off their armor, relax, confident that they have time before any threat arrives. They have left their ships some distance away, at a place called Rickle, guarded by a portion of their force. They are waiting for hostages from York, waiting to consolidate their hold on the region. They do not know that Harold Godwinson is coming much faster than anyone expected. Harold Godwinson, upon hearing of the invasion, makes a forced march north with a speed that astonishes contemporaries. He He covers nearly 200 miles in just a few days, gathering forces as he goes, driving his men relentlessly. He arrives at York on September 24th, learns where Harold's army is camped, and immediately marches towards Stamford Bridge. He intends to catch the invaders by surprise, to strike before they can fully prepare. On the morning of September 25, 1066, Harald Hardrada's scouts bring alarming news. An English army is approaching, and it is large, and it is close. The Battle of Stamford Bridge begins with confusion and haste. Harold's men scramble to form their lines, grabbing weapons, pulling on armor, trying to organize themselves in the face of an unexpected attack. Some of the sources suggest that Harold sent riders back to the ships to summon reinforcements, but they will not arrive in time. The English attack is swift and fierce. Harold Godwinson's men charge across the bridge and into Harold's forces, and the fighting becomes brutal. Close quarters combat, shield against shield, blade against blade. The sources describe the battle in fragmented ways, as sources from this period often do. There is a famous story, likely legend but repeated in many accounts, of a single Norse warrior who held the bridge alone for a time, cutting down dozens of Englishmen before he was finally killed when someone floated under the bridge and thrust a spear up through the planks. Whether this happened or not, it speaks to the ferocity of the fighting, the desperation of men caught in a battle they did not expect. Harald Hardrada himself fights in the thick of it. He is 51 years old, an age when many men have long since retired from the battlefield, but he is still a warrior, still a king who leads from the front. He wears his armor, carries his sword, shouts orders to his men. The battle rages for hours, the English pressing forward, the Norse holding their ground, both sides suffering terrible losses. And then, at some point during the height of the battle, an arrow strikes Harold in the throat. The sources vary slightly in the details, some saying it was an arrow, some suggesting a different wound, but the outcome is the same. Harald Hardrada falls. The king who survived the Battle of Stiklestad, who fought across the Byzantine Empire, who sailed from Norway to Jerusalem and back, who conquered and ruled and dreamed of glory, dies on a field in England, far from the fjords he called home. His death does not immediately end the battle. Tostig Godwinson takes command, and the Norse warriors, driven by loyalty and desperation, fight on. But without Harold, their spirit breaks. When the reinforcements finally arrive from the ships, exhausted from their run, they are thrown into a battle already lost. The English press their advantage. By the end of the day, the Norse army is shattered. Thousands lie dead. The survivors flee back to their ships, and Harald Godwinson lets them go, taking their promise that they will leave England and never return. Tostig is dead, killed in the fighting. Harald Hardrada is dead. The great invasion has failed. You breathe slowly now, feeling the weight of that ending, the suddenness of it. Breathe in, breathe out. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort. The way a life of such ambition and achievement can end in a single afternoon, in a field whose name most people will forget. History does not pause to mourn. 3 days after Stamford Bridge, on September 28, William of Normandy lands on the southern coast of England with his own invasion force. Harald Godwinson, having just won a great victory in the north, is forced to march his exhausted army south to face a new threat. On October 14th, at a place called Hastings, Harald Godwinson himself is killed, and William becomes King of England. The year 1066, which began with the death of Edward the Confessor, ends with the thrones of England and Norway, both occupied by new men, and the old world of the Vikings fading into memory. Harald Hardrada's body is recovered from the battlefield. Some sources say it was returned to Norway, buried with the honors due a king. Others suggest he was initially buried in England, at York, before being moved. The details, like so many details from this distant time, are uncertain. What is certain is that his death marks an ending. Historians often point to the Battle of Stamford Bridge as the symbolic close of the Viking Age, the moment when the last great Norse warrior king fell, and the world of the sagas gave way to the world of castles and knights and feudalism. It is a convenient marker, perhaps too convenient, but there is truth in it. The age of the longships, of sudden raids and far voyages, of warriors seeking glory and silver in foreign lands, is over. A new age is beginning. But Harald's legacy does not end with his death. In Norway, he is remembered as one of the great kings, a man who brought strength and stability to the realm, even if his methods were harsh. The sagas tell his story, embellishing it, turning him into a figure of legend. Snorri Sturluson, writing in Iceland in the 13th century, devotes a significant portion of his Heimskringla to Harald's life, drawing on earlier sources, on poems and oral traditions, on the memories of those who knew him. Through Snorri, and through other medieval writers, Harald becomes more than a historical figure. He becomes a symbol of the Viking Age itself, of its ambitions and its violence and its strange, restless energy. He was, by all accounts, a complex man. The sources describe him as tall and strong, with a fierce presence, a man who could be generous to his friends and merciless to his enemies. He was a poet, composing verses in the Norse tradition, using the intricate meters and kennings that mark the art of the skalds. Some of his verses survive, fragments embedded in the sagas, offering glimpses of his thoughts, his pride, his awareness of his own place in the world. He was ambitious, perhaps ruthlessly so, driven by a need to prove himself, to rise above the fate that seemed destined for him after Stiklestad. He was also a man shaped by his travels, by the years he spent far from home. He brought back to Norway not just wealth but ideas, experiences, a broader view of the world than most of his contemporaries possessed. He had seen the splendor of Constantinople, the complexity of Byzantine politics, the sophistication of Mediterranean warfare. He had walked streets that were ancient when the North was still wild. And he tried, in his own way, to bring some of that knowledge, that order, back to Norway. His reign was marked by efforts to strengthen royal authority, to build churches, to establish a more centralized administration. He was not always successful, and his methods earned him enemies, but he left Norway stronger than he found it. His claim to the English throne, in hindsight, seems almost quixotic, a gamble that never had much chance of success. But for Harald, it must have seemed possible, even probable. He had, after all, achieved so much already. He had risen from exile to kingship, from poverty to wealth, from obscurity to fame. Why should England be beyond his reach? It is easy, from the comfort of historical distance, to see the flaws in his plan, the overconfidence, the underestimation of Harold Godwinson's speed and skill. But Harald was not a man given to caution. He was a man who believed in his own destiny, who had staked his life on bold moves before and won. That this final gamble failed does not diminish the audacity of it. And so we come to the end of the story, to the quiet after the battle, to the reflection on what was and what might have been. Harald Hardrada's name echoes down the centuries, carried in the sagas, in the histories, in the collective memory of the North. He is the last of his kind, the last great Viking king, and his death marks the close of an era. The world he knew, the world of raiders and explorers, of jarls and longships, and the old gods, giving way to the new, fades into the past. The North becomes Christian, becomes part of medieval Europe, becomes something different from what it was. But the memory remains. The stories remain. The image of a tall warrior king, standing at the prow of a dragon ship, sailing into the unknown, seeking glory and fortune in distant lands. The image of a man who fought from the fjords of Norway to the deserts of the east, who served emperors and defied kings, who won and lost and never stopped striving until an arrow found him on a September afternoon in England. You breathe deeply now, the story settling around you like a blanket, warm and heavy and soft. The waves roll gently against the stones of a northern shore. The wind moves through the pines, carrying with it the scent of the sea. The longships are gone, their timbers rotted, their sails long since torn by the wind. The warriors are gone, their names forgotten or half remembered, their deeds turned into songs. But the land remains. The fjords remain, dark and deep and cold, reflecting the sky. The mountains remain, rising steep against the horizon. The stars remain, the same stars that Harald saw when he stood on the deck of his ship, sailing home from Constantinople, sailing toward England, sailing toward his fate. History moves slowly now, like the tide, like the turn of season. The world feels far away. The struggles and ambitions of long-dead kings seem like dreams, like stories told to help you sleep. And perhaps that is what they are, in the end. Stories. Memories of a time when the world was younger, when the seas were highways to adventure, when a boy could grow up in the shadow of mountains and die on a throne or on a battlefield, having lived a life so full that it takes an hour just to tell it in the quietest of whispers. Harald Hardrada is gone. The Viking Age is gone, but the wind still blows across the north, and if you listen closely, on a night like this, when the world is still and sleep is near, you can almost hear the echo of a name carried on that wind, whispered by the waves, remembered by the stones. Harald, the last great Viking king. The fire burns low. The night deepens. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the sea, the rise and fall of the tide against the shore. There is no rush. There is no urgency. History has been told, and you are part of it now, in the way that all listeners become part of the stories they hear. You are standing on that shore, feeling the cold air, hearing the gulls cry, watching the sun set over water that stretches to the edge of the world. And slowly, gently, as the night settles around you, as the story fades into silence, you drift, like a ship on a calm sea, towards sleep. The waves rock you. The wind hums a lullaby. The stars wheel slowly overhead, marking the passage of hours that no longer matter. You are safe. You are at peace. The world and its struggles are far away, distant as the battles of 1,000 years ago, faint as the memory of kings. The longships are gone. The warriors are at rest. Only the wind remains, moving across the water, whispering old names, old songs, old stories, until even those fade into the gentle, endless quiet of the northern night. Sleep now. The story is over. The world is still. And in the stillness, there is only peace, only the soft rhythm of your breath, only the knowledge that history, for all its sound and fury, ends as it always ends, in silence, in rest, in the quiet that comes when the telling is done. The waves continue their eternal work, smoothing the stones, wearing away the edges of the world. Time itself seems to slow here, in this quiet space between waking and dreaming, between the present moment and the distant past. You sink deeper into comfort, your body heavy and warm, your mind drifting like fog across a morning fjord. Let us linger a moment longer in Harald's world, not to stir you from your peace, but to deepen it, to let the texture of his time wash over you like gentle rain. Think of what Norway was in his day, in the middle of the 11th century, when the old ways were fading but not yet gone, when the new faith was taking root, but the old gods still whispered from the stones and trees. The landscape was much as it is today, though wilder, less tamed by human hands. The fjords cut deep into the mountains, their waters dark and cold, reflecting the steep slopes that rose on either side. In the summer, the sun barely set, hanging low on the horizon through the long twilight hours, and the valleys filled with the sound of birds and the rush of snow melt cascading down from the heights. In winter, the darkness pressed close, and the people gathered in their longhouses around the central hearth, telling stories, doing the work that could be done by firelight, waiting for the sun to return. The longhouses themselves were sturdy structures of timber and turf, built to withstand the harsh weather. Inside, smoke from the fire rose toward a hole in the roof, and the air smelled of wood smoke and cooking meat, and the bodies of many people living in close quarters. There was little privacy, little space for solitude. Life was communal, bound by kinship and obligation, by the complex web of family ties and feuds that defined the social world of the North. Harald grew up in this world, learned its rhythms and its rules. He would have known the taste of dried fish and barley bread, the weight of wool and fur against the cold, the sound of wind in the rafters on a winter night. He would have learned to sail before he learned to read, if indeed he ever learned to read at all, though his time in Byzantium might have changed that. He would have learned the intricate genealogies of his family, the stories of his ancestors, the obligations he owed, and the honors he could claim. And he would have learned to fight. Every boy of his class learned to fight. They practiced with wooden swords, then with real ones, learning the weight and balance of a blade, the way to hold a shield, the footwork that kept you alive in a shield wall. They learned to use the spear, the most common weapon of the age, and the axe, that most Norse of weapons, capable of splitting a helmet or cutting through a shield rim. They learned that courage mattered, but so did cunning, that reputation was earned through deeds, but could be lost through cowardice, that a man was measured by his ability to defend his honor and his kin. Harald learned these lessons well. By the time he fled Norway after Stiklestad, he was already a capable warrior despite his youth. The years that followed, the years in the East, honed those skills to a razor's edge. In the service of the Byzantine Empire, he learned the art of war as practiced by one of the most sophisticated military organizations in the world. The Byzantines did not rely solely on courage and strength. They used strategy, discipline, formations that could shift and adapt to the flow of battle. They used cavalry, which the Norse rarely employed. They used siege engines, engineers, military manuals that codified centuries of experience. Harald absorbed all of this. When he returned to Norway, he brought with him not just wealth but knowledge, a deeper understanding of how power worked, how wars were won, how kingdoms were built. He was no longer just a Viking warrior but something more, something shaped by two worlds, the North and the South, the old and the new. His reign, from 1047 to 1066, was marked by this duality. He was a traditional Norse king in many ways, leading from the front, rewarding his warriors with treasure and land, settling disputes through personal authority. But he also tried to impose a more centralized, more organized system of governance, one that drew on what he had seen in Byzantium. He strengthened the power of the crown, built churches to cement the new Christian faith, worked to establish law codes that would bring order to a fractious realm. Not everyone appreciated these efforts. The Norwegian aristocracy, the great landowners and chieftains, valued their independence. They had supported Magnus the Good in part because he was more flexible, more willing to share power. Harald was harder, more demanding, less willing to compromise. He made enemies. Some of these enemies he crushed. Others he tolerated, as long as they did not openly challenge him. It was a constant balancing act. The work of kingship, in an age when kings ruled not through bureaucracy, but through personal relationships, through the ability to inspire loyalty or fear. The long conflict with Denmark wore on him and on his kingdom. It was a war without glory, a grinding, exhausting struggle that drained resources and accomplished little. The naval battle at the Nisan River in 1062 exemplified this frustration. Both sides came to fight. Both sides suffered losses. Neither side won decisively. The sources describe the confusion of naval combat. Ships grappling together, men leaping from deck to deck, the water turning red with blood. But when it was over, when the dead were counted and the ships pulled apart, nothing had changed. Denmark was still Denmark. Norway was still Norway. The border remained disputed. The grudge remained. Perhaps this is why Harald turned his attention to England. After nearly 20 years of fighting Svein Estridsson to a stalemate, the prospect of conquering England must have seemed refreshing, a chance to achieve something definitive, to win a kingdom not through attrition, but through a single, decisive campaign. It was a gamble, certainly, but Harald was a man who had spent his life taking gambles. And for a few brief weeks in the autumn of 1066, it seemed as though the gamble might pay off. The victory at Fulford was significant. York, the second city of England, had surrendered. The north was in his hands. If he could defeat Harold Godwinson in a set-piece battle, if he could hold what he had taken through the winter, if he could attract more English nobles to his cause, then perhaps, just perhaps, he could make good his claim. But Stamford Bridge shattered that hope. The speed of Harold Godwinson's response caught Harold completely off guard. It was a failure of intelligence, of scouting, the kind of mistake that Harold, with all his experience, should not have made. But he made it, and it killed him. You breathe slowly, feeling the sadness of it, the way even the greatest warriors, the most experienced commanders, can be brought down by a single miscalculation, a moment of overconfidence, the turn of fortune's wheel. Harold had survived so much. He had survived Stiklestad, survived years of war in foreign lands, survived the intrigues of Constantinople, survived 20 years of rule in Norway. To fall at Stamford Bridge, defeated by his own assumptions, by the unexpected speed of an enemy he had underestimated, seems almost cruel. But history is full of such cruelties, such ironies. And yet, there is something fitting about it too. Harold died as he lived, in battle, fighting for a crown, refusing to accept limits, reaching for something beyond his grasp. He did not die old and sick in his bed, fading slowly from the world. He died in the midst of action, in the heat of combat, his sword in his hand. For a warrior of his era, for a man of his temperament, it was perhaps the only appropriate ending. The sources that survive from his time are fragmented, incomplete. Much of what we know about Harold comes from sagas, written a century or more after his death. Works like Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla, which blend history and legend, fact and embellishment, in ways that modern historians must carefully untangle. But even allowing for exaggeration, even discounting the more fantastical elements, the outline of Harold's life is clear, and it is extraordinary. He was born into a world of conflict and died in a moment of conflict. He traveled further than almost any man of his age, from the Norwegian interior to the gates of Jerusalem, from the frozen north to the sun-baked Mediterranean. He served emperors and fought beside princes. He earned a fortune and lost it and earned another. He married, fathered children, built alliances, broke them, made enemies, made friends, ruled a kingdom. He was a poet, a warrior, a king, a wanderer, a man caught between the pagan past and the Christian future, between the world of the sagas and the world of medieval Europe. And when he died, something died with him. Not just a man, but a way of life, a set of possibilities. The Viking Age, which had begun centuries earlier with the first raids on English and Irish monasteries, which had seen Norse warriors and traders spread across the known world, from North America to the Caspian Sea, from Iceland to Constantinople, was ending. The longships would still sail, of course. Norse culture would persist. But the age of expansion, of conquest, of sudden raids and vast fortunes won by sword and sea, was over. The future belonged to different powers, different peoples, different ways of organizing the world. Norway itself would change. Harald's successors faced different challenges, different opportunities. The kingdom would become more integrated into the Christian world of medieval Europe, more focused on internal development than on external adventure. The wild, restless energy of the Viking Age would give way to something more settled, more ordered, more Christian. It was not necessarily a better world, just a different one, and many of the values and practices that had defined Harald's era would fade into memory, preserved only in the sagas and the poetry, in the archaeological remains of ships and weapons and jewelry, in the runes carved on stones in lonely places. But memory is a powerful thing. The stories of Harold and his contemporaries, of the great raids and voyages, of the warriors who sailed to Byzantium, and the settlers who made new homes in Iceland and Greenland, of the battles and the feuds and the heroes, became part of the cultural heritage of the North. They were told and retold, written down and copied, passed from generation to generation. They shaped how the Norse people saw themselves, how they understood their history, their identity, their place in the world. And now, more than 1,000 years after Harald Hardrada fell at Stamford Bridge, we still tell his story. We still marvel at the scope of his life, the audacity of his ambitions, the way he moved through the world like a force of nature, unstoppable until he was stopped. We tell his story not because we wish to glorify war or conquest, not because we think his values are ones we should emulate, but because his life, in all its complexity and contradiction, tells us something about the human experience, about the drive to achieve, to explore, to test one's limits against the limits of the world. Harald was not a saint. He was not even, by modern standards, a particularly good man. He was ruthless when he needed to be, harsh in his judgments, willing to use violence to achieve his ends. But he was also brave, skilled, intelligent, a man who rose from exile and obscurity to become one of the most powerful rulers of his age. He lived fully, intensely, squeezing as much as he could from the years he was given. And in the end, he died as he chose to live, reaching for something more, something greater, something just beyond his grasp. The wind stirs. The night deepens. Your breathing is slow and steady now, the rhythm of sleep beginning to claim you. The story of Harald Hardrada is complete. The arc of his life traced from beginning to end, from birth in the Norwegian uplands to death on an English battlefield. All that remains is the quiet, the stillness, the gentle descent into rest. Think of the fjords one last time. Think of the water, black and deep, reflecting the sky. Think of the mountains rising on either side, their peaks white with snow even in summer. Think of a longship moving across that water, its oar strokes measured and steady, its dragon prow cutting through the gentle swells. The ship is empty now, or nearly so, just a few figures aboard, shadows in the twilight. It is sailing into the distance, into the gathering dusk, toward a horizon that blurs and fades until you cannot tell where the sea ends and the sky begins. This is how legends depart. Not with fanfare, not with trumpets and declarations, but quietly, slipping away like a ship into the mist, becoming part of the landscape, part of the memory of the land. Harald is part of that landscape now, part of the stones and the water and the wind. His bones lie somewhere beneath the earth, in Norway or England, returned to dust as all bones must. But his name remains carved not in stone but in the stories we tell, in the histories we write, in the collective memory of a people and a time. And you, listening to this story, are part of that memory now. You have followed Harald from his birth to his death, walked with him through the palaces of Constantinople, sailed with him across the North Sea, stood with him on the field at Stamford Bridge. His story is part of your story now, in some small way, a connection across the centuries, a thread linking you to a man who lived and died 1,000 years ago, whose world is gone but whose name endures. The fire has burned down to embers. The room is warm and dark. Outside, the night is deep and still. The kind of stillness that feels like a presence, like the world holding its breath. You are comfortable, safe, your body heavy with the pleasant weight of approaching sleep. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. The world can wait. History can wait. For now, there is only this moment, this breath, this slow drift toward dreams. The waves roll on, as they have rolled for millennia, as they will roll for millennia more. They know nothing of kings or battles, of ambitions or empires. They know only their own rhythm, the eternal push and pull of tide and moon, the slow work of shaping the world one grain of sand at a time. And in their rhythm, there is peace, a reminder that all things pass, all storms end, all struggles eventually fade into the quiet of memory. Harald Hardrada fought his battles. He won some, lost some, and in the end, lost the one that mattered most. But he fought them bravely, lived boldly, refused to be small or cautious or content with less than everything. There is something to admire in that, even as we recognize its costs, its limits, its ultimate futility. He was a man of his time, shaped by its values and its violence, and he left his mark on it, for better and worse. Now, His story is told. The pages of history have turned. The sagas have been sung. And you, dear listener, have heard it all, have taken it in, have let it become part of the quiet tapestry of your thoughts as you drift towards sleep. Rest now. Let the story settle. Let the images fade. Let the names and dates and distant battles blur together and dissolve like mist in sunlight. What remains is only the feeling, the sense of a life fully lived, a story fully told, a connection made across the vast distance of time. The longships are gone. The warriors sleep. The Viking Age is over. And the night is deep and kind and welcoming. Your eyes are closed. Your breath is slow. The world recedes. And in the darkness, in the stillness, in the gentle embrace of sleep, there is only peace. Only the wind now, soft and constant, moving across the water, across the land, carrying the last whispers of old songs, old names, old stories, into the endless northern night. Sleep well. Sleep deep. The story is finished. The world is quiet. And you are safe, and warm, and ready for dreams. Good night.